Divine Space Gods, Abraham's Follies, written by Martin Lundqvist and narrated by Elaine Hidayat. Chapter 1. So far into the future that anything can be potentially conceivable, i.e. the year 2785. 1.1. A rich, grumpy old man, wanting to stay alive, spends a ludicrous amount of money on an implausible project. The rich, old and grumpy Abraham Goldstein looked out through the window of his penthouse apartment on Antarctica. From his apartment, 3,000 meters up, he could see all his vast domains all the way to the ocean, far away at the horizon. Despite being the richest and oldest man on the planet, he wasn't happy. He wanted to own more and be more powerful. There was a problem with this foolproof plan, though, that Abraham was 250 years old, and the life-extending pills that Abraham and all the other rich people on earth were taking had started to lose their effect on him. Despite being so rich and powerful, it was time for him to finally take a nap, 6 feet down under. Abraham was not ready to die yet, however, and had come up with an implausible and ridiculous plan that he would spend all his money on before he died to bereave his horrible relatives of their inheritance. He had ordered a top-grade scientist, Jack Brown, to partake in a secret project, building an absurdly expensive and huge machine in the basement of Goldstein Tower. This machine, a huge particle replicator, would create a dimensional rift that would allow Abraham to meet God before he died, which was a bit wasteful as Abraham was already 250 years old, and he could simply stop taking his life-extending pills and die anyway. 1.2. Abraham tests the ludicrously expensive machine and finds out that God is dead. The next day, Abraham woke up and decided to take the lift all the way down to the basement to meet Jack Brown and use the expensive and potentially dangerous machine that Jack had built there. Unfortunately, Abraham forgot to notify the building management that he wanted exclusive access to the lift. So instead of 5-minute long lift ride to the basement, Abraham had to spend half an hour in the bloody lift, with people getting on and off at every level, something that made him grumpier. Eventually, he got down to the basement and he was met by Jack Brown, his leading secret scientist and Jack's team. Abraham spoke. He said, "So, is my very large and expensive secret machine ready?" Jack Brown was struggling to keep a straight face. What kind of idiot thought it was possible to build a 1-kilometer long machine in the basement of one of the landmark buildings of the planet unnoticed? The number of noise complaints Jack and his team had received over the last few years was staggering, not to mention the endless shuttle traffic of trucks needed to freight away all the excavated soil and rocks from the construction process. Jack Brown managed to contain himself from laughing and spoke. He said, "Yes, sir. It is ready." Abraham said, "Took you a long time to answer that easy question? Time is money. Chop chop." "Have you tried the machine yet? I want to be the first one to use it." Yet again, Jack Brown was struggling to contain himself. Of course, he had tried the mind travel machine at multiple occasions. What kind of idiot would ring up his boss to inspect the machine just to demonstrate that it didn't work? Jack Brown said, "As per your instructions, you will be the first to try this large and potentially dangerous machine." Abraham Goldstein said, "Excellent. I love an employee that blindly follows orders and doesn't think for himself. Plug me in." Jack Brown says, "Yes, sir. I must warn you, though, that time in the divine dimension does not follow any normal logic and simply moves the way that suits the narrative." Abraham Goldstein said, "Thank you for that completely irrelevant remark. Start the machine already." Jack started the machine and instantly Abraham fell asleep. His lips started to mutter some gibberish and his mind was sucked into a dimensional warp. And suddenly, he ended up in an eerie but beautiful courtyard. This experience was cool and all, but how could he be sure that this was heaven and not just a cool virtual reality simulation? Abraham would not be happy if he had to spend 120 billion Terran credits, a large part of his fortune, on an advanced video game. He wanted good value for his investment. He wanted to meet the God of his people, Yahweh, to play chess with him. Abraham walked into the palace that was at the end of the courtyard. He witnessed a very fancy-looking throne, and in front of it lay a dead man in robes. Abraham thought that if the dead man was indeed God, he had wasted his bank savings for nothing. But he walked up to the body to confirm its identity. Conveniently, the dead man had been thoughtful enough to write a suicide letter. The suicide letter contained a lot of gibberish, but from it, Abraham concluded that the dead man, in fact, was Yahweh, who turned out to be an alien that used Zetan mind control technology to fool Bronze Age humans that he was a god. That seemed like something Abraham was keen to do as well, and to his great relief, Yahweh had been nice enough to print the blueprints to the mind control technology needed on the pillar next to his throne. Abraham tried to memorize the schematics to the mind control technology for hours without success, but then he realized how unnecessary this was. His brain had a lot of bionic chips installed, so all he needed to do was to look at the pillars and then use his memory chip to take a screenshot. A screenshot that could then be extracted once he came back to his science lab. Now, all he needed to do was to go back to the normal dimension. And Abraham waited and waited. After endless waiting, he was getting frustrated at Jack for not waking him up. And suddenly his mind was extracted, and he ended up back in the science lab. Abraham Goldstein said, "You bloody fool! I have been waiting forever." Jack Brown said, "Oh really? You have only been connected for a minute." Jack held in a laugh. He knew exactly how long a minute felt in the simulation. It felt more like a week. Abraham Goldstein said, "Oh really? So all that time was just a minute. How good is that?" Anyways, to my great disappointment, it turns out that my God, Yahweh, was an alien that used mind control technology to trick people into thinking he was a god. On the bright side, he was kind enough to mention the mind control chips and their schematics in his suicide letter. If there was only a way to recreate these strange alien artifacts that I have taken a screenshot of in my brain. Jack Brown said, "There is. Being far enough in the future for anything to be plausible. We have access to a particle replicator, a machine that can create an exact copy of anything we have a blueprint for." Abraham Goldstein said, "You mean like a 3D printer?" Jack Brown said, "A lot better. 3D printers can't make exact copies of alien artifacts." Abraham Goldstein said, "Excellent. Make me a 30 angel chips, 300 human chips, but only one God chip. There can be only one God. Me." Jack Brown said, "Sure, mate. Whatever, as long as I get paid." Abraham Goldstein said, "I will pick them up tomorrow." Abraham then went to the lift for the long way up to his penthouse. This time, he was smart enough to call building management and make sure that he had reserved access to the lift, so he didn't have to share it. Chapter 1.3. Abraham Goldstein tells Lucifer about his evil scheme. The day after Abraham Goldstein told his right-hand man, or henchman, Lucifer, about his upcoming evil scheme, the following conversation took place. Lucifer said, "So, first of all, can I start using my real name, Terence, instead of my silly operations name, Lucifer?" Abraham said, "No, because we are running evil schemes and secret operations together. We can't expose your real identity." Lucifer said, "But why? No one even knows me under my real name on this continent. People think that I'm a dork that's named Lucifer. It doesn't work wonders with the ladies introducing myself with that name." Abraham said, "I don't care what name you are using on your dates. You are using Lucifer when you are talking with me, as that is your employee name. Period." Lucifer said, "And you are telling me this now? Such a long dry spell I have had for no reason." Abraham said, "Well, if it's any comfort, once you reach my age, you will lose all interest in sex and can focus your full attention on evil schemes and making money." Lucifer said, "Lose all interest in sex? What about your 8 super sexy, scantily clad female assistants? Abraham said, I have no interest in having sex with them, but making others envious of me never getting old. Anyways, back to my plan. Yesterday, I used my super expensive top secret divine detector machine to travel to the divine dimension and meet with Yahweh, our God. Unfortunately, Yahweh was dead. However, he left schematics to an advanced alien mind control technology that I can use to convince people that I am God. Lucifer said, Hate to break it to you, boss, but your super expensive machine is anything but secret. We have received a ridiculous number of noise complaints on the last year. I and your other angels, or henchmen, have been forced to work around the clock, convincing people that they have not heard anything. As for the meeting God part, wasn't the 120 billion Terran credits you spent on the project a bit excessive? I know a guy that sells 3 doses of acid for 50 credits. It gets you the same effect. Abraham said, How do you know about that? Lucifer said, It's not that hard when you forget to lock your computer and there is a file in capital saying, My secrets do not open. Abraham said, Have no one taught you self-respect? Anyways, the next step of my plan is to implant all my relatives with a mind control chip so I can intimidate them into doing what I tell them to do. Lucifer said, Isn't that a bit redundant? To my understanding, threatening people is just the same thing you have been doing the last 200 years. Maybe try something new. Abraham said, Mwahahaha! This is new and innovative. For the last 200 years, I have been threatening people with my wealth and my henchmen. Now, I'm threatening them with advanced alien technology instead. It's a game changer. Now, you must leave. I'm planning to use my mind control technology to fool my young and beautiful assistant into believing that I am having sex with her, while I'm drinking whiskey and watching her being in that state of trance. Lucifer said, That is the dumbest thing I have ever heard. Why don't you just have sex with her for real, like a normal person? Abraham said, Who is the old-fashioned one now? Get out of my office! Chapter 1.4 Exhausted Lucifer falls asleep waiting for a date. Lucifer felt exhausted, as he and his fellow henchmen had been working around the clock for 3 straight days, secretly implanting all of Abraham's distant relatives with the alien mind control technology. That would make it easier for Abraham to bully them. But now he finally had a night off, and his excessive finger swiping his smartphone had paid off. He had found a date on an online dating site. Finally, being able to use his real name would be a game changer, as Terence Lowenstein, security specialist, sounded a lot better than Lucifer the henchman. Lucifer closed his eyes and dreamt about all the sexy women he would get in the coming years. But it all ended up a dream, as Lucifer fell asleep while waiting for his date, and then got kicked out of the bar. as the bar staff assumed he was intoxicated. Poor Lucifer. Chapter 1.5. An unusually low number of deaths during the Goldstein annual general meeting. The day after Lucifer's dating debacle, it was time for the annual general meeting of House Goldstein. Abraham Goldstein had decided to transport his mind to the divine dimension, which would amplify the effect of the plot device, the Zetan divine technology chips. For Abraham, his trip to the divine dimension was a stroke of genius. But for everyone else, it was a major inconvenience, as the over-dimensioned particle accelerator used up all the power of the grid, which caused blackouts across the city. Stumbling in the dark, with the lights only sporadically flashing, the members of Abraham's extended family eventually managed to get to the conference hall to listen to his latest decrees and follies. Due to Abraham's enormous wealth, age, and prolific bedchamber activities, during his younger years, there were 300 relatives spanning over 10 generations gathered. Abraham showed up in the middle of the room as Mirage, enabled by the divine technology, and he spoke. "Greetings, relatives. I'm speaking to you as a mirage, enabled by alien technology, amplified by the secret particle accelerator in the basement of Goldstein Tower." Jake Goldstein, Abraham's grandson, 190 years old, replied, "Secret? The bloody building is vibrating every night because of that machine. The power went out and my wife fell over and broke her leg as she stumbled through the darkness. Can you turn that bloody thing off?" Abraham said, "No, the machine is imperative for my evil schemes. If you could call our Goldstein factory's operators and tell them to shut down for a while, that would save more power. My smartphone does not work through the dimensional rift. It says connection error." Jake said, "Okay." Jake called the factory managers, asking them to shut down operations, and after a while, power returned to the Goldstein Tower and the meeting could resume. Abraham said, "Yeah, so like I said, I found out that our God Yahweh is dead, and I also found the mind control technology he used to trick us into believing he was a god. Now, I want to do the same thing, except not to people on Earth, but to a made-up tribe of Bronze Age people." Jake said, "Ha ha ha! Good luck with that, mate. Time travel is not possible. So where would you find these retarded people?" Abraham said, "Do not argue with your elders. You shall suffer." Abraham released an unexplained psionic blast that activated the kill switch on the mind control chip implanted into Jake's brain. That caused a massive brain hemorrhage and instantly killed him. Abraham said, "Anyone else got something to say?" Matt Goldstein, one of Abraham's younger relatives, tentatively raised his hand. Abraham said, "Yes, Mark, Michael, Simon." Matt said, "It's Matt, sir. I'm just congratulating you. Instantly killing someone with a brain hemorrhage is a very quick way to kill. However, I would argue that it is not a death that causes a lot of suffering." Abraham said, "Wah, ha, 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 ha. Good point. As a reward, I will let you live. Anyways, as time travel indeed is impossible, I will terraform an asteroid to be a perfect replica of the Holy Land as it was in 1000 BC. I will then memory wipe a bunch of Martians and brainwash them into thinking it is the Bronze Age, and I am their god." Matt said, "But isn't that prohibitively expensive? You can't just buy the real Holy Land from House Rashid for a dime and a nickel." Abraham said, "You are clearly not catching on, Matt. Never question me. Time to die." Abraham snapped his fingers and Matt dropped dead to the ground. Abraham said, "Anyone else got something to say?" Joseph Goldstein, who had a form of terminal and very painful cancer, saw an excellent opportunity for a pain-free death. Joseph said, "This is blasphemy. There is only one true God, and that is Yahweh. You are merely an impostor and a tyrant." Joseph then smiled and gave Abraham the finger. Abraham responded by killing him. Just after killing Joseph, he recalled Joseph's condition, and to his great regret, he realized that it would have been crueler to let Joseph live. Abraham then shouted out to the assembly, asking if anyone else had anything to say. No one did, but Abraham proceeded to kill 3 more of the delegates for arbitrary reasons, as he was a megalomaniac supervillain and enjoyed being that way. Chapter 1.6 Abraham meets with the Terran Council, an organization for evil plutocrats. A few weeks later, Abraham Goldstein with Lucifer and Isaac Goldstein in tow went to the Terran Council meeting that was being held in the Swiss Alps. Abraham was eyeing through the pre-meeting minutes. Essentially, they were going over various ways the plutocrats on Earth could torment the poor plebs living on Mars. While Abraham also enjoyed tormenting the Martian population, just for laughs, this did not interest him now. Instead, he was thinking about how he could convince the Terran Council to give him control over the seemingly worthless asteroids B528A and B528B, so he could build his futuristic and yet backward Bronze Age world, Eden. During the trip, Isaac Goldstein was thinking about how much he hated his new job and his promotion. Before Abraham went on a killing spree, killing all Goldstein's relatives who were more prominent than Isaac, Isaac had an easy life, living in abundance with plenty of time to fiddle his thumbs without doing any work. Now that he was promoted to second in charge, he had to do actual work, and he was a lot more likely to be killed in his wicked ancestors' dementia-induced hissy fits. Abraham entered the meeting room. The host casually remarked to Abraham how expensive the table was to show off the wealth of his faction. This annoyed Abraham, but since he was not at his own home, he avoided throwing a temper tantrum. The meeting was about to commence. The Terran Council represented the 5 richest ruling families on Earth that all had their own specific territory, and their own race and attached stereotypes. The ruling factions were House Goldstein, the Jews, who obviously was the richest faction, or at least used to be before Abraham's dementia-induced spending spree started. Hausmuller, the Germans, being industrious, devoid of any humor, and painfully arrogant. White, the Americans, being the most racist factions and the faction most inclined to war and violence. Rashid, the Arabs, being uncouth barbarians with an inclination towards cruelty and beheadings. Cheng, the calculative Chinese, being shifty, cunning, and unreliable. Through a stroke of magic, all the 5 ruling factions were equally powerful, and they all controlled a fifth of the planet each. They all shared the same passionate hatred for poor people, especially the poor people on Mars. And all in all, they all lacked any redeeming qualities whatsoever. The leaders of the factions each gave a speech detailing their nefarious plans for how to make life miserable for the Martians. Abraham, having heard the same speeches for the last 200 years, got bored and fell asleep, snoring. Eventually, Isaac woke him up when it was Abraham's turn to speak. Abraham said, sorry. I wasn't sleeping, just preparing my speech while I was in deep thoughts. Hansmuller said, interesting method. Never heard anyone snoring so loudly while preparing a speech before. Abraham said, anyways, I'm willing to fund the proposed penal colony around the Tau Ceti star, on the condition that the council grants me ownership and complete privacy for the asteroid B528A and B528B. Abraham Rashid said, yes, Isaac told us about your plan to create a fake Bronze Age colony where you can pretend to be God and recreate the atrocities from the Old Testament. Abraham looked at Isaac in a mix of disbelief and anger. He had to contain his murderous tendencies, though, as it would be unsuitable killing his second in charge during a Terran Council meeting. But what would he do now that his plans were out in the open? Ibrahim Rashid continued, no need to worry, Abraham. I think it's an excellent idea. I can even lend you the Holy Land on Earth for free if we get the television rights. Abraham said, no, that is not how I envision things to go. I will do this the hard way by spending the remainder of my wealth on making a replica of the Holy Land on an empty asteroid. And for that, I need both asteroid B528A and B528B. Ibrahim Rashid said, okay, suit yourself. Hansmuller said, that concludes the agenda for our meeting. I will now provide you with the refreshments shipped from our colony orbiting Alpha Centauri. Shipping it here took 40 years and it was incredibly expensive, making today's meeting dinner exquisite. After this, they all proceeded to eat and drink Hausmuller's edible space food from Alpha Centauri. The produce, having spent 40 years in the cargo hold of an interstellar spaceship, was unpalatable, but everyone at the meeting kept a straight face and ate it anyway, as it indeed was rare and expensive.